Hi, my name is Officer Victoria Gibson. I am an ABLE instructor here at the Metropolitan Police Academy, and I'm going to introduce to you today some pillars of ABLE that are important to officers in this department. MPD is committed to effectively train all of its members to receive meaningful training that facilitates active bystandership and ensures successful intervention. Active bystandership entails that officers can and shall intervene in another officer's actions regardless of their rank. ABLE training, which stands for Active Bystandership in Law Enforcement, shows officers how to effectively focus on 3 pillars of understanding. Officers should intervene to promote health and wellness, prevent misconduct, and reduce officer mistakes. Especially for officers in patrol, bystandership means that every officer on the street knows that everyone around them has committed to being willing to step in when and if needed. The health and wellness pillar is so important because as humans, we know mistakes will be made. ABLE allows officers to know that their well-being will be taken care of by their fellow officers by being willing to be coached and corrected on the scene. When an officer is placed in a position where misconduct may occur, not providing good customer service, not being able to calm themselves down, or not seeing signs when a situation is escalating. Again, when the agency commits itself to having all members trained, the officer knows that other officers will not stand by and allow misconduct to occur. Oftentimes, officers also make mistakes that can harm the outcome of investigations. When that happens, officers of any rank are encouraged to stop the activity from continuing to encourage a better outcome. The model that ABLE provides protects the officers that have intervened on behalf of another officer, and it creates an environment that encourages a cultural change within the profession of policing. For the officer, it is important to impart that ABLE is not a disciplinary reporting program, but a program that stresses the importance of stepping in when an officer is doing or saying something where another approach is warranted for a better outcome. And at this time, I would like to present to you the Mayor of the District of Columbia, the Honorable Muriel Bowser.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to thank Officer Gibson for that outstanding introduction to what we're here to talk about today. I am joined by members of my public safety leadership team, and we are, of course, at MPD's training facility. And the chief is going to talk to you in some detail about what Officer Gibson just mentioned. This weekend, of course, our entire city was host to Police Weekend. And today, ahead of our annual awards ceremony, I want to also acknowledge the hard work and dedication of the Metropolitan Police Department. It's been certainly a tough few years, both because of the pandemic as well as gun violence in cities like ours that cities are experiencing nationwide. We know, too, that this has not been an easy climate for police work. But what I appreciate about MPD, and I think that what makes us a model for police departments nationwide, is that our officers stay committed to building trust in our communities. The Metropolitan Police Department has evolved over the years to one of the most forward-thinking police agencies in the country, leaning into innovation. This is not a department that's stuck in its ways or unwilling to try new approaches. And not every department in the country has a course focused on learning the history and culture of our city like we do. And not every department in our country found a way to host more than 1,600 community outreach events in 2020 alone. So today we're going to observe another type of training that our officers are going through that's already been described. You've heard me say it, and Chief Conti says it. Our standards for how our police interact with the public is very high. And as we do with every public servant, we expect, even in high-pressure situations, that the men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department react in ways that keep our whole community safe. And that's what they do in hundreds of interactions that they have with the public every day. And that's why we invest in programs like the one you're going to observe today. So with that, I'd like to introduce the Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, Robert Conti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good afternoon. Today it is my pleasure to be here with you and the members of the Metropolitan Police Department's Police Academy to share with you an exciting training program in which all members of the MPD are going through this year. While MPD has trained members for years on the requirement and duty to intervene, this year, as a part of our annual professional development training, MPD formally adopted a new national best practice training program which continues to give our members the best training available. This training employs evidence-based practices to give officers the tools and skills they need to perform an intervention on a fellow officer, a subordinate, or even a superior officer. MPD has had a policy regarding intervention for many years. To implement this program, MPD agreed to 10 key pillars of the ABLE program and was sponsored by 2 community organizations. Both organizations, the Anti-Defamation League and the United States Holocaust Museum Memorial, have had long-standing educational programming discussing active bystandership for 20-plus years with all new officers. ABLE is unique and provides members with the skills and tactics on how to intervene and to do it successfully. It takes lessons from other industries like aviation and medicine. We all have seen national viral videos and said, if I were the officer, I would have stepped in. But the reality is that intervening is often harder than not. It is a skill that can be trained. This training enables our members with the skills and resources to intervene when necessary and prevent costly mistakes, ideally before they have the ability to occur, thus reducing discipline and career-altering events. Taking examples from other industries, the program itself gives empowerment to our officers, regardless of rank, and aims to promote a culture of intervention being rewarded. It empowers all members to have the confidence and ability to intervene before misconduct has the ability to occur or to step in before things are exasperated. As chief, it is my priority to offer avenues where our members can build upon their education in their career every day. To date, 1,396 members of the Metropolitan Police Department have successfully completed the training, and we have 13 certified ABLE instructors. Training will continue until all MPD personnel have received this important training. I am proud to offer this training to our members and lead this department. Our department is committed to ensuring our personnel are the best trained in our profession. At this time, if there are any questions that you have with regard to the ABLE training, the mayor and I, we can entertain some questions before a demonstration that we'd like to show you all. Okay, we'll start this way and work our way over. Mark?
Chief, could you give us some examples of some cases, both locally and nationally, where you think officers should have stepped in and this training would have been valuable?
Well, I think that the most noted training, obviously, is the situation, or where this training would have been helpful, is a place like Minneapolis, where we saw the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. Had other police officers stepped in, perhaps Mr. Floyd would be alive today. But we do know that in that situation, in that police encounter that the other officers, they did not step in.
Any DC police? I'm thinking about. I don't want to feed you suggestions.
Yeah,
but
I think you can look at our history, Mark, and certainly there are situations that I wish that we could do differently. You look at in my 30-year career, there are a whole lot of instances that I think that we could have done differently, that we could have done better, and perhaps if a police officer had intervened prior to that encounter going the way that it did, we would have had a different outcome. So I am hopeful that as the members of the Metropolitan Police Department receive this training, that we'll see better outcomes. And you think about it in industry, for example. Let's use something that's not police, right? So a new attorney who is now who's a junior attorney in a law firm, and you have a senior partner who's maybe saying something or perhaps going down a road that he or she shouldn't. How willing is that junior member to challenge the senior person within that law firm? Well, you can make that same connection in medicine with doctors and nurses. You can make that same connection in the aviation field, and we make those same connections in law enforcement. Looking at some of our new officers, some of the officers who are behind us in tan, these officers will be on the street soon, riding with veteran police officers. We want to just not only tell them that they have a responsibility to intervene, we want to demonstrate to them how they should intervene to have a successful outcome.
And then can I just ask for housekeeping logistically,
Sure.
Is this something that an outside firm is doing the training that's being paid for? Is there a cost to this, or is this all done internally?
So the outside firm, they train the members of the Metropolitan Police Department, and we have several members now who are trained. So for us, it's zero cost because we have trainers who are trained to do this. I think our numbers up to 13 people who are trained to do this training. So we want to go, all out and make sure our entire department. I think the keynote here is, we started back in December with this, and right now we're up to over 1,300 members of our 3,500 member force that are trained. Going around. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, how many hours the training takes, and then are your officers going to be retrained, and how long a time span is it before they're retrained?
So it's 8 hours training, and what we do every year, we do our annual in-service training. And what we look to do as we get this initial training out of the way, really kind of assess, okay, what's the best way moving forward? Should we, now that everyone has had it, is there a retraining component that's maybe 4 hours later on? But we'll assess that as we move along. But right now, the goal is to get all of the members trained through the initial 8-hour course.
Younger cadets or younger officers being, maybe afraid to intervene with higher ranked officers,
Sure.
or even if, they're the same rank, but maybe they're worried to say something, or the officer they're trying to correct is, a hothead or something and doesn't want to listen. Obviously, this training would, kind of talk about that a little, but are there any other programs that your officers go through to help them, if maybe they've had experiences in the past that have, altered their mental health to where they have a tougher time, or they react a certain way that would, interfere with the other officer, trying to help out?
Yeah, so we've been training on active bystandership for a long time, for 20 years. But the difference with this is really demonstrating to the members how to do it, right? To tell them that they have a responsibility to do it is one thing, but to actually show them how that's done. And that's what we want to demonstrate in our exercises that we have planned for you guys today. That's a different skill set. It's different from, hey, knock that off. And again, I should add that because we have a successful intervention, it doesn't mean that the person will not be disciplined as a result of, whatever that interaction, potentially negative interaction with the public. Doesn't mean that that person doesn't get disciplined for it. It doesn't mean that that person, might not be expelled from the police department or dismissed from the police department. We want to make sure that that intervention happens as soon as it possibly can to make sure that we have the best possible outcome, not just for the person that we're engaged with, but also for our city, for our police department. Was there a question over here on this side? Sam? Sure. Okay.
For example, I know you have people, psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. on the department. Have they ever told you that so-and-so doesn't really need to be an officer? Has that ever happened before?
Oh, all the time. So our officers go through a very extensive recruiting background phase, and we get people who are interested in the law enforcement field, but part of their the checks and balances that we have prior to members becoming Metropolitan Police officers, we go through a pretty extensive evaluation to include psychological evaluation, polygraph, etc. And there are people who, it will come back recommended. We recommend you not hire this individual. And many times we just flat out, we just don't.
Has it happened where they've actually been hired and you decided based on this recommendation that they be, let's say, taken off the force?
So in some instances, perhaps as a result of something that may have happened while the person is employed with the Metropolitan Police Department, if the behavior is egregious to the point that it calls for a person to be terminated, there's a process for that, and we have had individuals that have been terminated as a result of, whatever you want to call it, erratic behavior, those types of things that may not have been that may not have been caught, if you will, early on during the screening process. We all change as adults. A person at 20 years of age or 21 when they first come onto the department, after they've lived some life, and now they're in their 30s, and maybe they have kids, and maybe people engage in drinking and that kind of. Just life happens to people, and people could very well find themselves in position where they're not suited to be a police officer, and we obviously have to take action to, from time to time, to dismiss people when that is the case. Yep, your off-topic question.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
So 12th Street Southeast,
Yes.
Watkins Elementary School's right there. You
Yes.
had October 6th, a homicide across the street from it turns out the city council chairman's home.
Yep.
Yesterday you had a homicide where a bullet broke the window of the ANC commissioner.
Yep.
You've had at least 2 carjackings in the area. I guess my question is, and obviously it's something you're concerned about, but
Sure.
what are you doing, and what do you do when you have an area like this hit like this?
Yeah, so we know first and foremost that is not an area, let's look at those things in context. It's not an area where things like that normally occur. We know that the first instance that you talked about was somebody who lost it essentially during a flag football game. That's unfortunate. Didn't have anything to do with anybody in the community other than the fact that they were there on the football field there. The second instance that we had, as we learned through the investigation over the last couple of hours, the individuals who were there, and we're making great progress on this case, but the individuals who were there, really had no association with the area. It's unfortunate for that area. Obviously, we deploy to areas where we see crime and we see crime trends. We deploy members to the area, but some things, like that, they're very hard to prevent. They're also very hard to predict. What we can prevent and what we can predict that people who have guns who should not have those guns, we can predict that they will engage in gunplay, that they will engage in crimes when they are out in our community. We can predict that, and we can prevent it. The way that we prevent it is that when they are when they should be held accountable, that we hold them accountable. When they're arrested, and I'm sure with this individual or these 2 individuals, when we get closer to who the actual individuals are, I'm sure, as I've stated many times before, just like with the triple shooting that we just closed up on Longfellow, they will be no stranger to our system. The question is, how do we prevent this from happening going forward? And that is making sure that violent criminals are not on the street, not in community, making communities unsafe.
And of course, Chief, you did have 2 carjackings. That would tend to affect just general people as opposed to those involved. That's pretty...
Yeah, carjackings have been an issue, not just for our city. Specifically here, I know that concerns the residents as it does me. Early on in the year when I first came into the job, one of the things that we did, we created our carjacking task force, which has been very successful in terms of the number of arrests that they've made over the course of time that they've been in action. Pretty much less than a year. With that being said, we're seeing some of the same issues there. Some of these individuals who have engaged in carjackings are individuals who have carjacked and done other similar violent crimes before. Again, if we can predict it, we can prevent it. And the way that we prevent it is by holding violent criminals accountable. Carjackers, I would say, fall into the category of violent criminals. While we have had some success in that space, arresting juveniles as well as adults for some of the carjackings, more juveniles than adults, unfortunately, we know that these individuals oftentimes end up back out in our communities, and that makes our communities unsafe.
Chief, Mike Murillo with WTOP.
Hey, Mike.
How you doing? So, you kind of already answered part of the question, but we're hearing from ANC commissioners about especially those two shootings near Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your message to them? Are they talking to you? And what is the plan moving forward?
Yeah, it's the same message for every community, not just because it's Capitol Hill. It's the same message for Southeast. It's the same message for Northwest, Northeast, Southwest. When we have violent criminals that we identify in communities and the Metropolitan Police Department arrest those individuals, we need to be about the business of ensuring accountability across the board. And what that means, what it should not look like when these individuals are arrested that they're back out in community not long after they commit some of these acts that they've committed. We're going to keep arresting. I promise you that. Every year we lock a lot of people up. On average, 30-some-odd thousand people in the District of Columbia we incarcerate. The problem is when we keep seeing the same individuals arrested over and over again. How many violent crimes do you need to commit before you get held? Next question.
I just had one more back on topic for today. You know,
Okay.
you talked about the importance and what this training program specifically does. Were there any other programs that you considered, and then you know, what ultimately made you choose this program for this type of training?
Well, we look at a lot of stuff. We're doing a Blue Courage training, which is talks about officer resiliency. We're doing the ABLE training. We look out there in the universe of like really kind of what's the best practices that are out there, and we want to make sure that MPD is really kind of, you know, with that leading pack in terms of how we do business. For example, the ABLE training. You know, NYPD is an early adopter. Philadelphia Police Department is an early adopter. Arlington County Police Department, early adopter. I feel like I'm missing a few. New Orleans, they also adopted this as well. But you know, I'm always on the lookout for any type of training that's late, that's the cutting edge, that's the latest and the greatest, to make sure that we have the best police department in the nation and we're putting the best officers out in community.
In making sure that they have time to do these trainings, you know, some of them taking 8 hours, you know, that's most of a shift. How do you make sure that the officers are not only trained and having the time to do that, but making sure that you also are keeping the number that you need out on the streets, keeping the community safe?
Yeah, so we're mandatory. We're mandated to have our officers conduct 32 hours of training every year. We actually do 40. In that space, we get to decide what will go into that 32-hour space. So as we're making these assessments, again, you know, this is not a, you know, one shot and everything is over with. You know, we really kind of look out the long term. Like, for example, you know, we're already planning and looking ahead to what training, not for 2022, but what training we'll be doing in 2023, because we're almost in 2022 now. So, you know, we really try to scope it out to make sure that the training, that it really works for the agency, that it works for our city, that we can do it in a time frame that we need to do it, and that it's not rushed. I want to make sure that we have what we need, and not just to check a box to say, oh, you know, we gave them some active bystandership training. We want them to have quality training, and if it takes 8 hours, that's what it takes. I think where we see the benefit of that is these interactions out here in community. We respond to over 700,000 calls a year for service, and most of those interactions are great interactions, but it only takes one negative interaction to impact what this police department invests in community day in and day out to really erode that trust. So I'm willing to make the investment of 8 hours, 16 hours, or whatever it is to make sure we have the best officer out in community. Yep. Any other off-topic questions? Yes,
I actually
Mark?
had a couple for the mayor. I have
Okay.
one on topic and then two off for you,
Okay.
Mayor Bowser. Mayor, on topic on this, what do you hope the community takes after hearing about this training, given what, you know, the tension that may be out there between the community and the police department? What are you hoping that citizens will take from learning that this kind of training is going on?
Well, Mark, I think it puts faces to what Chief Conti and police leaders say out in communities each and every day, that we have been investing in the professionalizing this department, providing our officers with the training and resources that they need for the better part of 20 years. So MPD takes very seriously making sure that officers have the tools that they need. I think another aspect of witnessing training, and you've been here with me before, with the chiefs before, to talk about all aspects of training, is that all of the situations that the officers go into, they aren't black and white. They aren't one size fits all, and it requires people to use good judgment and to use every skill that they've learned in every situation so that they go home safely and that we protect the community, and that's important. I think the chief has already highlighted what we all saw, a man killed in the street when other officers looked on. And that's an important, not just other officers, other people looked on. So that is that we have to learn, we have to stop, we have to pause, and we have to learn from that and how we ensure that that dynamic never happens again. This type of training is also supported by other investments we make in our department, including making sure that every patrol officer has a body-worn camera. So we can go back, and training officials can go back and inform what our officers need to know, or better know, when they go into these interactions. We also have an independent police complaints board where citizens can go if they have an interaction that troubles them about that department. All of those things we collect, inform the training that the chief selects to make sure that our officers have the resources that they need. So that's what I want our residents to know, that we're committed to constitutional policing. We're committed to hiring the best of the best, and we are hiring MPD, right, Chief? MPD is hiring, so if you're one of those people who's committed to this city, to providing safe neighborhoods and building trust in communities, come work for us.
And if I could ask two off-topic questions.
Sure.
One maybe for you, or maybe I see Deputy Mayor Gelhardt is here.
Sure.
About a D.C. judge recently found the D.C. jail's warden and director in contempt of court regarding medical care for one of the January 6th defendants who's being held there. Do you have any comment on that, or what's being done to correct that situation?
I'm going to turn to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, ma'am. I think what we saw at the courthouse as we were having that hearing is all the documentation that was asked for and all the actions that were needed by the Department of Corrections were provided. I think that we have been working with the Marshal's Office. As a matter of fact, they're in today doing an inspection of the jail and talking with many of the January 6th folks that are there to make sure that we are continuing to do that. We did provide the information that was asked for by the judge in a timely manner prior to the hearing, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to abide by what we get from the court.
I appreciate that. And my last question for you, Mayor, and maybe Chief Conti, I don't know. Just any comment on the death of Colin Powell, and I don't know what your relationship with him was, if either of you knew him or had worked with him in the past.
Well, thank you for that, Mark, and I think mine will be similar to every grateful American who looked at Colin Powell's life and can see that a son of immigrants who was committed to excellence and demonstrated courage could rise in public service to the highest levels and still be committed to giving back even after his public service was over. It's also a reminder to us that the scourge of COVID has taken too much from our country. Over 700,000 Americans who have lost their lives because of COVID. And I did not know the general personally, but it felt like I did, maybe because he was so generous with his time and attention and talking about leadership for young people, but also how to perfect our American political system. And I think his life is also a wonderful example of how people of different ideological backgrounds, I understand that the general was a lifelong Republican, yet he spoke up for candidates who were of a different party if he thought that their vision was best for America. So I just think that he provides a wonderful example. The last thing I'll say, Mark, is frequently we talk about, and we've heard a lot, that the general was 84 years old. And the way I see it, and I've always kind of seen him, he was very spry and with a lot of life. And even though he was 84 years old and he had experienced a long life, I still feel like we've been shortchanged. The general probably should have lived to 95 or 100. That's just me saying, from the looks of him. You know what I mean? And so let's not all, we experienced this at the start of COVID. Let's not sacrifice our older people and not question why too we didn't have that extra time with them. But for COVID, the general could have been with us for many years.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mark. I had an opportunity to meet General Powell a few years ago, and I'll tell you, man, I think he's going to be truly an American hero. I know that he will be missed. One of his quotes that resonates with me day in and day out, here in the Metropolitan Police Department, we say excellence is transferable, meaning that excellence transfers to everything that we do. The general, he would say that excellence is not an exception, it's a prevailing attitude, and that will always resonate with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now at this time that the question and answer session is over, if you all can join us at the rear of the training academy, we are going to be doing a role play that will demonstrate ABLE. Thank you.
Everybody. Come on this way. Come in, please. You too.
All right, so good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This scenario we created early during this year as different factors. The scenario was the call for service was for a subject who was shopping inside Mr. Lee's. And while shopping inside, the owner thought what he saw to be a valuable gun. The purpose of this scenario was to determine our interaction with someone who legally has a concealed carry permit. What we wanted to see from the member was, first of all, would they stay within the policy and deal with a subject who had a concealed carry permit, and their interaction with ABLE. I'm going to turn it over to Instructor Baker. He's first going to talk briefly about the tactics, because everything that we do down here is about us being safety. And then I'm going to turn it over to Officer Gibson, who's going to talk about the ABLE part of it. Instructor Baker.
Good afternoon. So again, as this relates to the part we talk about tactics as it relates to officers being safe. As they come out, they observe the gentleman fitting the description. Notice what they had in his hand. In his right hand was a cell phone and a plastic bag, which was good. His hands are occupied. Assessment is a big part of what we do when we talk about tactics. So they came down, approached him. They asked him the proper questions. All right. They got good spacing. As they came up, they presented themselves in a proper manner, but there was no pretty much crossfire. And at that point, another officer came up to engage because he noticed the gentleman, and one of the officers created a separation. So at that point, the point of tactics is one officer addressed the individual, the other officer kept eyes on and maintained the other officer kept him at a distance. So that was good, pretty much good tactics as far as it relates to keeping officer safety as well as the individual.
In reference to ABLE, where we did see the positive interaction occur, Officer Stewart came up. He was upset. This is somebody who he has recognized from his beat. He became upset that another call for service had come out for the same individual. We are human beings. We can be egotistical. And after I've told you once to leave the scene, we do expect someone to leave the scene. So the suspect still was back on the scene. A call for service came out. So Officer Stewart became upset. Officer Charles did the right thing to turn around and say, yo, just leave the scene. Where we're gonna get in trouble, and we need a little bit more training, is Officer Stewart did not completely leave the scene. It's difficult and it's tough for an officer to be told to do something when they think that they are in control of the scene. It's tough. It's human nature to say, I got this, leave me alone. Officer Stewart kept trying to come back, he kept trying to come back, and so our training effectively says, if you go, you gotta go. You can't come back, you can't make your threats known, you can't say that you're upset, you can't keep going on. Once it's done, and leave it alone. This interaction became positive because our suspect did have a legal permit to carry, he was in the right to carry, and he was able to leave the scene appropriately, correctly.
Would he face any kind of discipline because he stayed on the scene and argued with the other officer?
In the event that our suspect, our complainant here, would have made the complaint that, hey, I was following this other officer's commands, he came up, he kept on yelling at me, he was harassing me, then yes, that would be subject to disciplinary action.
So something like that wouldn't have been documented by the officers on the scene, the other officers?
They very well could have, just to say, listen, I did employ an ABLE technique, which is I distracted him by removing him from the scene, and although he did leave the scene, he was still overactive, he was still talking more than what he should have, so yes, it would be subject to disciplinary action.
Should the cameras have been on?
I'm sorry?
Should the cameras have been on?
The cameras would have been on when they left the door. So the moment you get a call for service, we are mandated to turn our body-worn cameras on, so yes.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.